I would like to introduce myself. My name is Deb Polich, and I have the great fortune to have a couple of roles here. I am, in my day job, the director of both Artrain, one of those great Michigan programs that has stimulated economies all over the country, and also the Arts Alliance of the Ann Arbor area. And in addition to that, I am also very proud to be a board member of Creative Many Michigan and have served in that role for a number of years. It's a great pleasure to introduce our 2 p.m., make that 2:14 panel, which is called Investing in the Creative Sector. We've had a lot of conversation this morning, and we've heard a lot of things about what this sector looks like, about some of the challenges and opportunities that we have in front of us. And also now we're going to look a little bit more at investing in the sector. So I would like you to hold your applause for a minute so I can quickly tell you who's here, and then our moderator will go ahead and introduce them as they go along. So first of all, it's called Investing in the Creative Sector, and the panel is presenting and discussing investments, collaborations, and partnerships in the sector that lead to positive social, civic, and economic transformations. And they'll be focusing on new models. So let's welcome David Egner, the Executive Director of the New Economy Initiative, Helen Davis-Johnson, Program Officer of the Kresge Foundation, Kristopher Larson, who goes by Chris more often than Kristopher, Director of the Downtown Grand Rapids Incorporated, and then Helen Learn, who is the Co-Executive Director of LA-Más. And then now it really gives me great pleasure to introduce Jennifer Acree, who is, among other things, well, let me say this first. She's a program officer at the CS Mott Foundation, and she's also on my board at Artrain, so I'm really happy to say welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Debra. So in sort of response to both timing as well as an interest in continuing the dialogue that Rip and Jamie started around these new models of investing in the creative sector, we've sort of switched things up a bit. So we're kind of doing this on the fly, so you have to forgive us as we work our way through that. But we're going to start by hearing, we've spent a lot of time today in particular talking about Michigan and Detroit and what's happening, and I think in part I'm here because Jennifer Goulet asked me, but also, again, bringing another perspective. I am our Flint voice. I don't actually see any other Flint folks in the audience, so if you're there, sorry I missed you. So we're interested in hearing from some other voices in terms of examples of how this work is playing out in other places throughout the state and the country. And then we're going to move into some responses from the other panelists based on these initial presentations and really get into a dialogue with the audience and spend a little less time up front on the presentation. So we're going to start with Chris Larson, who is going to talk to us about his work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Okay, there we go. My name is Chris Larson. I run an organization called Downtown Grand Rapids Incorporated. We are a placemaking and place management organization on the west side of the state, and we administer public finance tools, which generally speaking is not inherently creative. But we are also a little bit of troublemakers locally, and so I'm going to talk to you about how we sort of embrace that opportunity to be able to introduce creativity into some of our work. Just regional context, Grand Rapids is the second largest city in the state, is named after a historic feature in the Grand River. That feature was then designed out for the sake of industry, and we're in the process of recreating our rapids and restoring the Grand River. Generally speaking, it's about 200,000 in city population and 1 million within the region. And then headquarters for a lot of household brands that you might recognize, as well as ArtPrize, which kicked off today, and I'll tell you a little bit about ArtPrize. So generally speaking, ArtPrize is one of the ways that Bland Rapids, so to speak, has rediscovered its cool as a community. We have some major events that help to become global attractions as it relates to different PARs for our community. We are about an average tier 3 Midwest city. So we've got a nice, vibrant downtown. We're doing a lot to continue to facilitate investment in that. And we've also been very successful at building a lot of those major anchors to be able to foster entertainment and creativity. So I want to give you a few examples of how we apply a different approach to our process of facilitating investment. And the first is a story regarding this bridge. And this was my first project when I moved to Grand Rapids 3.5 years ago. And this bridge is locally known as the Blue Bridge. And I was sitting in a meeting with our city engineer who asked me to authorize an invoice for $800,000. And I said, well, what is this for? And he said, paint. And I said, well, what color paint do we want to have? And he said, blue. And I said, why? He said, because it's the Blue Bridge. And I said, well, I don't know it's the Blue Bridge. It's blue now, but does it need to always be blue? Right? So let's go have a conversation with the community, and let's compel them to participate in this decision, because we're going to spend $800,000 of public money. Let's make sure that the community still wants it to be blue. So we went and did a survey, and what did we find out? About 2/3 of our community wanted it blue, but 1/3 did not. They started to imagine the next chapter, particularly because we empowered them with education. We told them about the history of the Blue Bridge. We told them that it wasn't always blue. It was originally black. It was a historic train bridge called the Indiana Grand Rapids Railroad Bridge. And in 1978, the city started painting it, and they stopped painting it because a local institution called up and said, stop right there. It's perfect, because we had just applied a blue coat of primer to the bridge. And so we had lived with a blue bridge for 35 years, and the community grew around it and began to embrace it as a mascot. And so we began to take that energy. We had over 3,000 people participate in this conversation about the next color of the bridge. Not everybody can talk about transitional density, but everybody knows about their favorite color. And when you enable them to visualize something different, we began to harness that energy and it became something different. Including extending the project into more than just a lighting project, more than just a painting project, but also a lighting project where we introduced color-changing LEDs so that our Blue Bridge now has a different way to transition to become its own next chapter and really embrace the energy of the community at the moment for things like ArtPrize. And so that was not done unless we had that energy of the community that participated. Secondly, we wanted to make an investment in urban recreation, and so we utilized just social media platforms and had over 10,000 people participate in helping to prioritize an investment in purchasing a gigantic movie screen. And so there was a lot of energy about this to create a new event in our community. And so we said, well, if people can participate in this way, right, a very simple thing that people can help to be able to prioritize, let's enable them to help us pick the movies. And so we crowdsource the entire process of this event series, and things like DeLoreans show up when we have these major events now. We're able to attract 5,000 people now for each one of these events, and we have $0 marketing budget by simply enabling and empower the community to be able to participate in that decision making. Different approaches as well is that we also don't believe that we should invite people to come see us. We believe in going to them. We are renowned for going out to bars and cafes and creating pop-up opportunities for people to advise us in our work and how to make it better. Engaging people where they are, rather than asking them to give up their Thursday night and Dancing with the Stars or whatever they'd rather do to come advise us on our work. Let's go to where they are already, and we've been awarded for that approach. And then also constantly looking for opportunities to take what we were already going to do and then build in different mechanisms to be able to empower and engage different segments of the community. And this is a simple window competition that we do in the winter time to help to dress up our storefronts for the holidays. And instead of just simply hiring a company to do this, we work with our local arts college, Kendall College of Arts and Design, to be able to tie young creatives, young students with opportunities to have professional development experience of working directly with business owners to design a storefront display and then creating a competition for them to basically build that experience for that commercial application. So because today is the kickoff of ArtPrize, I also wanted to talk a little bit about ArtPrize and the role that government and quasi-governmental organizations have in that space. For those of you who are not familiar, this is the largest open arts competition on the planet. Today's day one of that. Over 400,000 people will descend on Grand Rapids. That's twice our population for these 19 days. Generally speaking, I mentioned the overall attendance. It's been recognized internationally, locally, considered one of the top events on the planet. But how it works is that any place in our downtown community can become a venue. And so you have everything from coffee shops to offices. Everything becomes a venue. And we have over 1,200 to 1,400 venues end up registering. And then we build basically a match.com where artists and venues begin to connect. Right? So venues get to choose what artists they want, artists get to choose what venues they want so that they can be able to self-select what's appropriate in their individual venue, and then artists obviously want to compete for the venues that are going to attract the most interest. There's an educational piece to this as well, where we bring over 10,000 students to our community to engage in this process of enabling them to visualize themselves in this type of open source competition, really empowering their thought process of what it means to be an artist. And then it's really just, it's an open vote. And so we have a crowdsourcing for prize selection as well as juried contests. And so for all of this, it's a huge economic boom for our community, but then it also creates challenges for those of us that work in the approvals and permitting space, because some of these things, as you guys know, artists don't always like to play by the rules. They don't like to color within the lines, particularly in the public realm. And so this creates challenges for folks like Downtown Grand Rapids, Inc., or the engineer's office, who was curious about what color we should paint the bridge. But we need to find ways to get to yes, because oftentimes artists have these amazing ideas, and we have to figure out how to suspend a ladder over our main street that could come crashing down. Right? So these become engineering feats and marvels in as much as they are artistic statements. And that's a role for government to start to think beyond their normal day-to-day expectations about what qualifies as something that's approval ready. We also, this has a major impact on our construction schedule. We have 6 months of winter here in Michigan, which means that we don't get to build things year round. And we're choosing to cut off 6 weeks of that construction schedule in our downtown. We also then reimagine the types of services that we provide. So these 19 days present an opportunity for us to pilot ideas, to step outside of our bureaucratic thinking about, linear, this plus this equals 2, and let's start to think about it differently. How can we adapt? How can we try new things? How can we best serve this new population that we know is great for our community? And so things like rerouting all of our systems for transit and connection are a key part of that. Getting the businesses ready is another one. In the first year, the business community had no idea what to expect. To be honest with you, nobody had any idea what to expect from ArtPrize. And when hundreds of thousands of people come to your community, you end up running out of hamburgers and hot dogs and coffee and beer and everything else. Literally, our business community had to close after the first weekend of ArtPrize. And so now we have to work with them to help to understand what they need to do to prepare to realize the biggest 3 weeks of their year. Also then thinking about repositioning our infrastructure as an attraction, right? So infrastructure can be modified. It can serve as a way to really compel people to look and conceive their spaces differently. And how do we reposition those assets in a way that helps to really harness that artistic flair? So even in our river, we work on installations that go into the river. And then this is one of the most dynamic ones. ArtPrize, if nothing else, was designed to create a conversation locally. And so this is Alexander Calder's La Grande Vitesse. 2 years ago, we had an artist that applied these very large magnets. These are just sort of Kona-style magnets, and it created a vitriolic conversation about what is appropriate. Because for some people, this was, in some way, this was a very negative treatment to a very famous statue within our community. For others, they began to notice it again. It's existed in our downtown since the late 1970s. It's one of the first gifts of the NEA, and it's been there for so long it just blends into the landscape. So for the first time, they started to rediscover this and begin to learn about its history, who actually designed it, why it's there, right? And it was this simple application of some magnetic Konas that helped to recreate that conversation. And then lastly, I'll just leave with this. Certainly the sky is the limit as we approach these kinds of challenges. This is one of the most beautiful exhibits that has occurred at ArtPrize. It was a top 10 finalist in 2012. And this was a conversation with a local artist who told the city they wanted to launch 5,000 of these flaming bags into the sky. As you can imagine, our fire department was not keen on this idea, so we had to do a lot of educating of ourselves to be able to prepare ourselves for what this might mean. And I think artists are pretty smart in being conservative in their estimates. The 5,000 quickly became 15 or 20,000, but it became this really dynamic moment for our community to really recognize what it means to expand beyond our conventional understanding of what qualifies as appropriate or legal or dangerous, and embrace really what it can be. And these moments really have helped to put our community on the front of a lot of papers around the world, and it's because of that flexibility, it's because of really embracing and empowering creativity that we're able to pull these things off. And it's not without a lot of learning that comes along the way, but we're certainly learning to embrace what it means to be more accommodating for the creative community. Thank you very much.
So next we'll hear from one of our two Helen panelists, Helen Leug, who is the co-executive director, which she's not going to focus on. I am curious about how that works, but she's from LA-Más. So I'm going to turn over to Helen.
Hi, everyone. My name is Helen. I'm so glad to be here. I'm going to, for a moment, have you guys travel a little further west to Los Angeles. LA-Más, we are a nonprofit. We are a nonprofit community design organization, and our mission is that we try to promote a more equitable Los Angeles, and we do so through a multidisciplinary approach. We're a small team filled with architects, fabricators, urban planner, and policy wonks. And whenever we work in communities, we never come with a solution. Our work is ground up. And I would say that a few of our strategies that are evident in everything that we do is that we tend to have design interventions. This is a project in Northridge I'll be talking a little bit more about later. We engage the community. Wherever we go, we're often invited guests, and we ground our conversations and our efforts in the community. And to the extent possible, we advocate for policy. We want there to be long-term change. And so overall, as a nonprofit community design organization that is kind of co-led, and my co-exec director, Elizabeth, she's an architect, and together we can combine our collective skills and approach to work in communities with a community economic development framework that engages communities creatively. So we also want to always make sure that communities own the project, that we aspire for greater social equity, and that we have systemic change so that none of our projects are one-time events or Band-Aid approaches. So what I thought I'll do is also position kind of where we are in Los Angeles. It's very similar to some of the work happening here in Detroit and happening in Grand Rapids. In Los Angeles, the work that I'm about to explain, where we sit in that role is that we tend to be implementers. We're on the ground. We never want to create a vision that sits on a shelf. We're community builders. There are over 100 neighborhoods in Los Angeles. It's a big city. And there are people who live and work there. And we are consultants, we're allies, and what we do is we work with everyone in those communities. And finally, because we tend to be hired by city agencies, the mayor's office, city council members, we get to help these communities navigate through bureaucracy and often with the bureaucracy themselves. So I'm going to start off with just giving 3 quick examples of projects all over Los Angeles that provide an example of what public-private partnerships in communities that kind of bring out the creativity not only in ourselves as an organization, but really in support of community with a development framework. So I'll start off with Watts. Watts is a neighborhood in South LA that many of you know because of its riots, celebrating its 50-year anniversary this year. And this corridor in Watts is just blocks from the Watts Tower, which is a very significant art component and historic and cultural location in Watts. And in this neighborhood, it's known for lots of small businesses that are struggling. There isn't a lot of pedestrian activity. You know, there's some elements that make it unsafe. And what we wanted to do, we were invited by the city council member to kind of do something. They gave us space to figure out what to do. And so what we started doing was we grounded our approach by finding out kind of what has been done, what are some of the vision plans and research papers kind of sitting on shelves. We talked to people in the community. And what we realized was that small businesses wanted a greater sense of safety. They wanted an identity, and that they also wanted their businesses to do better. So the way that we went about kind of with our short budget and our short timeline was we partnered with everyone in the community, and we came up with this concept of let's have, at the very least, simple facade makeovers. And we had about over 10 businesses participate. They all got a fresh coat of paint. They also got hand-painted signage customized by students at LA Trade Tech, the only sign painting program in the country. And one business also got a mural to support a ganaceria, kind of a local market here, corner store in Watts. This is what it looked like afterwards. And another creative element that we did, because signage in Los Angeles is so expensive, and it shouldn't be, was we creatively used plywood. And for each of these businesses that participated, we helped them create their own business identity. We designed a graphic icon, and what that was is a piñata, so part of party store, a sausage for the ganaceria, a bike chain for a bike shop. And before, when people walked by, they didn't necessarily, or drove by, oftentimes people drove by this street to get to the Watts Towers, never stopping or even knowing that there were businesses there. You can tell there was not only a collective business identity with a color palette, but these collection of stores also now have their individual identity. And to increase a sense of safety, we also created a very light touch way of creating ambient lighting. So all we did was we got strips of LED lights and added them along the storefronts. We also partnered with another school and created street furniture. These are displays for the party store. This is a barber shop that's a kind of a hangout spot for people who are waiting to get their hair cut. A bike station for the bike shop. So these are all very light touch interventions, design interventions, and what we did was we hired locally. We did fabrication on site locally. We sourced locally. We had kids in the neighborhood that helped us build. And today, this area of Watts is actually a destination. People stop as they're going to the Watts Towers. More people are walking more than ever. And new storefronts that have opened up since kind of adopt a similar model of furniture, color palette, having a clear signage. So that's the first project. A second project is called the Great Streets Initiative. The mayor of Los Angeles, Eric Garcetti, his first executive order when he was elected was he created the Great Streets program. And the goal was to create complete streets, economically vibrant streets, make sure streets are pedestrian friendly, bicycle friendly, and 15 streets in the city were selected. This is one of those 15 streets, and it's 15 because the city of Los Angeles is split into 15 council districts. This is a community called Northridge, known for the earthquake in 1994. Also a very lowly populated, low-density neighborhood, and this street, Reseda Boulevard, is often a pass-through. There's tons of cars that pass through. No one really walks because everyone just parks in the back parking lot and enter through the back door. So we were given again an opportunity to figure out what we would do. So we grounded our approach in community. We talked to lots of community members. We gave them tangible, tactical ideas of what they would potentially like to see. On the floor is actually tape patterns of what kind of pattern designs community members would like to see on the street. And how we went about it was that we started to have a trial. So for one block, what we did was we decided, based on feedback from the community, that we would design furniture. Custom designed furniture inspired by what was prominent in that area, and it was made out of plywood. Most furniture that you see on the sidewalk is made out of metal, and the city doesn't even have a permitting process for plywood. We built it, we put that out in the street. What you see here is an architectural feature that's unique in that area, which are awnings in front of the businesses. So we dressed it up, made it look more fun and inviting to walk along. And the sidewalks in Los Angeles, there's no money to rebuild them unless they're really cracked. And oftentimes you see many different types of concrete there. So in order to make the environment a little bit more inviting, we decided to come up with a design, also inspired locally by the history there, that gave the city its first painted sidewalk in the city. And we did this with community members. Over 50 people volunteered. They took ownership of this. And combined in just 3 months, what you end up seeing is this transformed sidewalk, a place to sit, a place that's inviting, supporting the small businesses that are there. And what we did is we started off with just one block. We invited people back into the community to say, what do you think about these furniture pieces or this color? Do you want us to make any tweaks? We got some feedback, we made tweaks, and then we built it on 3 more blocks. And today, this 2 blocks is kind of the identity of this area. Community members are applying to program it, and it's a place that you see more pedestrians now than ever. Uh-oh, what did I do there? Oh, there you go. And we did it in partnership, again, with many people in the community. We found a community maintenance partner, Don in the beard there, was there every step of the way, so that when we're gone, he's going to take care of it. And he hires people locally in the neighborhood to help him maintain it. And one of the innovations I think that's unique, and it's something that should happen in these efforts, is that we were working with the city throughout the process. They were our partners. They helped navigate us through the bureaucracy. They met with us twice a week, and they let us have this as a pilot project. Again, there's no, similar to what Chris had to go through, there is no permitting process for painting a sidewalk or having plywood furniture. And our last project, and then I'll end with this, is a project down in Wilmington. So you think Watts is South LA, and you kind of go another 10 miles south, and you're in Wilmington, a neighborhood that was annexed by the city of Los Angeles to get to the port near Long Beach and San Pedro. It's often a community that has the most, actually has the most longshoremen in Southern California that live there. And this stretch, Avalon, used to be a vibrant commercial core of the city. It also is a city that a community that has the most bicycle lanes in Los Angeles, but yet not many bicyclists, because what you see is that it's mostly a pass-through. There's vacant storefronts. There are a lot of small mom and pop shops. And so what we did was we decided to start a process without having an overall solution other than to bring attention to Avalon Boulevard again. So we call this project On Avalon. We tested ideas first by saying, hey, community members, and we partnered with community organizations throughout this process. Come give us your thoughts on what you would like to see. And we started off with what we call kind of light tactical urbanism, but with a purpose. We end up transforming these sauna tubes. Sauna tubes are thick cardboard material used to actually pour concrete columns. We cut them down. They're usually 20 feet long. We cut them down and we turn them into business markers. These are business markers that are supporting the small businesses that many people don't know exist. We also turn them into planters and seating. This is right outside of this municipal building in Wilmington. This is one of the markers in front of a business that many people didn't know existed prior. And we turned it into solar lighting, because to test the idea is lighting something that community members would like to see. And this is all meant to be 2-3 months of interventions that are left there that invite the community members to engage in a conversation about what they would like to see permanently. And in order to do that, we have events in partnership with community organizations that draw people out. This is a massive movie screening at a place in Wilmington that no one really comes at night. Locals cooked amazing food. And for the first time, people went to a place at night that they never would have imagined going to before. And throughout all our events and our design interventions, we always have moments for, because the goal is actually having the community engaged to provide feedback. So sometimes we do it through boards or through conversations. But the way that really keep community members engaged is that we often have activities, we have events, we have a website that is bilingual, and eventually we hope to have a community organization take over that website. This is a photo of our local hired youth. They're called our Avalon ambassadors. They led the small business tours. So these are people who grew up in this neighborhood that are showing their neighbors small businesses that exist on this stretch that many of them have never been to before. And again, I would say that overall, we won't know exactly what will happen here in Wilmington, but we do know that we have the political support to have these projects be permanent once the community gets behind. And it could be wayfinding signage, it could be small business support, it could be ambient lighting, but whatever it is, we know that people in Wilmington will want to see it, and they're going to be the drivers of that change. And I think I'm almost out of time, so I would end with some of these lessons learned, but then I would also say that just hearing everyone talk today about the way that you guys work in your communities, it's kind of the very basis of meaningful, authentic community engagement, but with a dose of creativity that enhances not only the creativity of communities, but it allows for rules to be broken, it allows for new partnerships, and it allows for meaningful change that's outside of the box. So I would also venture to say that in terms of economic development, I think for us and what we've seen working across cities in Los Angeles, it's not about the new job that's created or the new business that opens up, which is wonderful. But in these are examples, I would say, of just different ways to be able to engage communities with a dose of creativity that enables community members and organizations to take ownership over the community and economic growth and vision of their neighborhoods. Thank you so much.
So I'm actually going to stay here, and so these have been great examples of new ways in which partnerships have helped do problem solving in communities, think about communities in different ways, different public and private partnerships. And so I want to turn it over to Helen Davis Johnson and David Egner to sort of expand a little bit based on your experience and the work that each of you are doing, other ways in which you've seen these types of new partnerships and strategic investments really change the way we're thinking about creative communities and community problem solving writ large as well. And I don't know who would like to go first.
All right, no, I'm happy to. So this is a day of two firsts for me. The first is that I've never been on a panel with another Helen before. So that's quite extraordinary. It's one of my favorite names. And also, I've never had to follow my most loquacious and eloquent president in a public speaking engagement before. So you guys have heard a lot about the Kresge Foundation from the previous panel where Rip and Jamie both, I think, shared quite a bit about how the Kresge Foundation thinks about this type of work. But I'll share just a few things from a program officer's perspective. So you know that the Kresge Foundation is seeking to expand opportunity in America's cities for people with low income. And that is something that the program staff and everyone who worked at the Kresge Foundation is all in on. We believe that with every fiber of our being. And as I do my work, which is on a national platform, I have the opportunity to travel to a number of different communities across the country where people from all walks of life are using arts and culture in the most extraordinary ways and integrating them into comprehensive community revitalization strategies that would blow your mind if you actually could hear about them on the news. And it's one of the things that bothers me the most that we don't hear about what's actually happening in our communities, because I think it is an example of the new American spirit. We have the kind of partnerships taking place across sectors, across disciplines, that are truly transforming the way that opportunity pathways are created for people with low income. And that is the focus of what we do at Kresge. We have to draw a direct line of benefit back to vulnerable populations, communities of color, and all kinds of communities that are struggling with many, many issues of structural and historical disinvestment. It is what we care about, and we are working very hard internally and externally to think about that. So you heard that we have 6 different program areas. We have education, environment, health and human services, Detroit, and arts and culture. And as we think about our work, we think very much about how to collaborate internally and to reflect the kind of cross-sector collaboration that we're seeing in cities all over this country. I think what I've heard just now is indicative of the kind of work that you could expect to see if you popped into almost any community in any city. I think we have a lot to be proud of as a country. We were asked to talk about partnerships, and I think one of the things that I would say is that this is not easy work. Partnering, as you all well know, can be difficult even if you're living in a household with someone. And when you try to think about partnering across sector and across discipline, there are so many misunderstandings that are easily coming into play because of the jargon that we use in our particular sectors, because of the way that we work, because of the approaches that we take and the things that we're comfortable with. And it is our responsibility as we move forward and experiment and learn together about how these collaborations take place to figure out how we break down these barriers and how we do it intentionally. And I think I heard that a lot already this morning too, that this isn't accidental work. And we won't expand opportunity for our cities if we aren't being very responsive and very intentional and very inclusive about it. And we have to prioritize equity as we do that. I'll stop there and turn it over to Dave.
Ditto, thank you. I'm so glad you guys went first. I am both encouraged and frustrated after watching those two presentations. I've come to know in philanthropy work that bad policy trumps good philanthropy and culture trumps everything. And I think if you look at the middle of the country where you had great success, particularly in large manufacturing, a culture emerged that was quite naturally explained as we moved to a point of controls, right? You want to make sure the bolts are tightened just right on a piece of machinery you're going to drive at 80 miles an hour down the Lodge Freeway every morning. But what it did is it created a culture that moved us away from culture of arts design as a driver. And I think it's a harder thing in the Midwest for us to recover from that and understand the importance of design and creativity inside of virtually every component of our life. And until we can do that, I'm afraid that we're going to continue to struggle with this connection that Davida framed very well for the panel before, this question of how do you market drive neighborhoods, community change, into the mainstream of earners, et cetera, from the creative community. So I'm frustrated because I don't have an answer to that. I'm encouraged because I think ArtPrize is a culture change model. It was about changing a culture. I'm encouraged because I think in LA you're taking policy and embracing it as part of that process. We're not there yet. And so as I look at the work of the New Economy Initiative and the Hudson Weber Foundation, my two hats, I'm struck really by the fact that we have a lot of work to do. I'm proud of what modest work we've done. NEI has recently done a contest from these viaducts that would allow a connection from this part of the community back to where you've got Tech Town and Next Energy and those pieces. And it's a creative design piece, really designed for people to feel free to walk and to use it that way. I'm proud of the Creative Corridor Design Center and what it's done, the Detroit Creative Corridor Design Center, and the matches it's made. I've got a great story of a wallpaper project from a group in Nantucket that said, we got to make wallpaper, we don't know how to do that. I made one call to DC3, and the next thing I knew, there was a wallpaper company in town making wallpaper for Nantucket. We have all these resources. And the co-working spaces and the other pieces. But going back to Rip's comments about funk it up, which is really a great way of thinking about things, I think when it comes to what culture's done, that phrase is probably apropos, but there's a different F word in it in the Midwest sometimes that we've done and how we've pursued the work in economic development and in community building. So I'll stop there and maybe go to questions. We've got a lot of work to do in this town.
So as we're seeing who in the audience might have questions, one of the questions that I want to pose, and you started to talk about this a little bit, David, in terms of the co-working space and the wallpaper company example, we've heard a lot throughout the day around this notion of talent and needing to both recruit, develop, and retain talent, specifically when we're talking about Detroit, Michigan, but more broadly and in other communities. And that's an important part of the economic development component of much of the examples that you've been talking about. So can you sort of go a little bit deeper and talk about some of the work you're doing and how you see that continuing to build on that talent component for your communities and the work that's happening? And I toss that to the full panel, whoever wants to respond and think about what you're seeing along those lines.
Everyone's charging in, so I'll jump in.
He said tough questions, so I was trying to
Right. Well, part of the talent challenge has been a lack of inclusive culture. So what we've seen, we've got great 3 Tier 1 research universities that are within 80 miles of each other. We've got this great design center that sits here as part of CCS. We've got You know, a great university, probably the most organized community college system in the United States exists in Michigan, and we are the best talent feeder system for the city of Chicago that they never had to pay for. And a big chunk of that is because we've not embraced design and culture as part of our community. So we've got work to do in that space. When we've seen it happen, it works tremendously. And like any other urban city that's turning, it's the creatives that turn it first. You know, that 2% lunatic fringe that come in and do things nobody else would do. And I think Detroit's revival that's written about is a revival that was first started by probably 25 people, a bunch of folks in this room could name, who were the lunatic fringe starting to change the culture and starting to embrace design and creativity. We just have to expand it.
So yeah, I have an opinion, but it's a broad opinion, and it's informed by a lot of different things. I'll say a couple things that I think our education team at Kresge thinks a lot about talent development and thinks a lot about making sure that first-generation college students not only get into college, but get through college, because the education that they receive lays an important framework for how they participate in civil society. So that's part of what we do at the foundation, but I think we have to think about defining talent very broadly too, and being really inclusive and not just thinking about talent as people who can do tech work, for example, or people who have a particularly high set of skills. We have to begin to embrace talent as people, and I think Jamie did mention that earlier, that we use talent as jargon. And I think if we begin to look at our communities very comprehensively and explore what skills the people in our communities actually have and create platforms for them to bring those skills to the table and to participate, and maybe at tables that they haven't been at before, then we will find ourselves in a very different situation in how we retain and attract talent.
And can I add one more thing to that? We attract and retain has been the language. If we don't reinvest and create, we're in big trouble. Right. And I think we've just kind of got this lexicon going of attract because of the depopulation, but creation may be more important than the other two. That's and right. We've got to reinvest in that.
So audience questions. I know we have mics running around here. Questions for our panelists? No, it's middle of the afternoon and we've all been sitting for a while.
If there's not a question, okay, I was going to say.
We have so many wonderfully talented, creative people here. One of the things I'd like the panel to speak to is arts education in terms of going to school for an MFA or going to school for a master's is actually one of the most expensive that there is.
But you make so much after, right?
Right, exactly. So working in the nonprofit world or working as an artist is so, it's wonderful, it's rich, I do it now, but I know that I think about how much I make and I think about my looming student loans, and it's really challenging. So is there a way that Michigan can, use these resources of these talented, creative people, but also find balance in paying them what they deserve?
I get some applause.
None of us were told to bring a magic wand up here, but I think what you're saying, I can validate what you're saying, in that I've worked with artists for the past 20 years, and so deeply, deeply understand the economic issues associated with choosing that career path and choosing that education. And I think it's a battle that we're fighting in many ways, but I also think that figuring out how we think very broadly about how we can apply that creative process may be one of the ways that we sort of, maybe if we don't open a door, we're climbing through a window to figure that out. But really coming at community from a position of strength, if you have that creative process in your back pocket, I think is important. We have some of the most complex societal issues facing us today. I think somewhere, maybe earlier, Cezanne called them wicked problems. And I'm not sure how we solve wicked problems without creativity. So no matter if you have an MFA, you have a BFA, you have some sort of artistic practice in your background, I would wager that you have not only the potential, but also the responsibility to participate in some very different conversations in the community and offer those skills in some places where people may not be expecting them.
If I could chime in on that as well, I think that there's an opportunity to be able to appeal to the policy levers that help to oversee the different tools that we wield in the state of Michigan. I think the state of Michigan is behind many other states as it relates to a percentage for art, particularly for projects that are utilizing public subsidy, public funds. We heard from Mr. Finney earlier about the MEDC and their great work. The number of dollars that are poured into real estate projects, from large to small, hundreds of millions of dollars down to very small projects. And very rarely are design and creative considerations placed as a priority. And so I think it's also a value conversation that we need to continue to have about the value that is placed upon integrating those components into these development projects and how we then create and help to lift that marketplace. Certainly we all love to look at pretty things, but when the balance sheet is just a function of construction costs and rental rates, and we are avoiding, I think, that hard conversation about the value of design, then I think that we're going to continue to have that struggle. But where we can continue to push for those types of measures, I think we can help to continue to bolster that market.
I also want to add that just even the Los Angeles perspective, where people, assume that there's a huge creative economy there, but how it actually fully gets integrated into communities and through, city bureaucracy, I think there's still so much untapped potential. Like David mentioned, that maybe Michigan isn't there yet, but it could be there. And I think, the work that I just showcased in LA is almost somewhat new, that even valuing design and the creativity process as a part of community and economic development, I think that there's so much opportunity to create work, create demand, and create value that will take some entrepreneurial spirit. But I think that kind of as an artist and kind of as designers and creatives, that Michigan will probably lead that effort, since there are so many talented people here and so much work that could be done.
I know another example in Flint. We recently went through a master planning process that included an arts and cultural component to that plan, and all of the various sort of sub-plans within the master plan had advisory groups, and the arts and culture group really struggled with where there's the whole notion of a 1% for the arts, how do we begin to set the stage for something like that for the community. But some real concrete things came about when we started talking about a revision of the city ordinances. And so being conscious of eventually having live workspace for artists in parts of the community in various neighborhoods, and some of the other things, as you said, in terms of painting on sidewalks, and really sort of upfront as they're thinking about developing those ordinances, what are some things to be thinking about long term that allow for some more creative uses of spaces and our infrastructure within the community as well. But that it was multiple stages in that planning process that got the local community to be thinking about those things.
Despite Michigan being a global city for a long time, or a global state really for a long time, we still struggle with one thing, and I guess I'd like to ask this question. I mean, we struggle with, instead of celebrating diversity, we see diversity as an obstacle, and yet within the cultural and arts community, you understand the richness of what diversity brings. How do we as a community, either local community or the state, celebrate diversity better than we do now?
Well, we can start with the creative festivals, et cetera, that are out there that celebrate the different belief systems, cultures that are in the region. But Doug, I think the problem when we look at this part of Southeast Michigan in particular is we've drawn pretty deep lines around political jurisdictions that have caused some real problems. And I think the only way, the long-term answer to your question is we let a lot of people die, and eventually they'll cross lines again. It's not a very palatable one, so we've been funding sharpshooters with NEI money to take them out faster. I think the way that we have, seriously, I think the way we have to do it is we have to challenge ourselves to get more uncomfortable in the places we go as people who are leading in the community. We've got to go to places we aren't necessarily comfortable going and show that we're embracing cultures that we don't normally embrace, and we have to invite people to come the same, and we've done a lousy job of that. And they do it so well in other places. I mean, I've not been in LA and not bumped into a festival of a culture that I'm not familiar with someplace, sometime, almost every time I've been there. And it's loaded with people that look very different than one another. We don't do that, and it's very frustrating.
Their thoughts on the diversity question?
I would not deign to offer a real response on that because I'm not a native Michigander. But I would say that it reminds me of a conversation that I had around 2007 with Suzette Justison, who runs an initiative called Over City. And she works with large corporations whom we've all heard of. But what she does is go into those boardrooms and into those executive offices and have the exact kind of conversation that you're referring to, except she's doing it on a corporate level. But talking to, what she says is a bunch of white men around a table, asking them to think about their skill sets, their experiences, and the different things that they're bringing to the table, and asking them to identify gaps, and really looking at what they're missing when they don't think about themselves as being a diverse group, and then also the reality that they're not a diverse group in many ways. So thinking about the strengths that diversity can lend to any kind of a conversation around any kind of a table, I think requires, again, that word intentionality. And some pretty tough decisions about being inclusive and really being persistent, right? This is long-term work. This is not something that, there's no silver bullet for this, but I do think that there is value to thinking about the role that arts and culture particularly can play in engaging us in ways that really help us connect to each other authentically.
We have time for one more question, and then we're going to move on to the next panel.
Yeah, it just strikes me that a conversation in front of this group in this kind of space about talent bumps heads with the kind of conversation about talent that is going on in Lansing today. So there's this notion here that the development of talent is for the creation, the promotion, the nurturing of creativity and a sense of wonderment. And in Lansing, all the talk about talent is skills, the development of a set of skills that can be applied in some economic setting that currently, but maybe not tomorrow, needs those skills. So can you talk about the little disconnect between our talent talk and Lansing talent talk?
I think you just did, George. As soon as the session is over. But if we don't demand that out of our leaders and keep pushing it and frankly step up and be leaders ourselves, we can't start the movement. And I feel like there's, I don't know about you, but I feel like there's a movement starting, but it just can't get enough momentum to be fully heard yet. I can feel it, but it's not something that's so overt that our elected officials are paying much attention.
Well, I want to thank all of our panelists for the great discussion this afternoon, and I know we have another fabulous panel coming up, so if we could help me in thanking them for their contribution.